In the 1970s, more than two-thirds of the land in the Borneo island were covered in rainforest, lush greenery, flora and fauna. One of the last bastions of untouched rainforest in the world. In less than 4 decades, much of it has been lost, and now we are looking at a green figure of 30% left of rainforest cover in Borneo. Much closer to home in Sarawak, while state government boasts more than 60% of forest coverage and sustainable forest management, replanting of trees, we still continue seeing timber industry continue to grow rapidly. State governments were given, they give out concessionaires and all that to timber tycoons and all that. So let's look at this situation. Hi, and this is Norman Goh. You're listening to Bicara Minggu Ini. So in this episode, we'll delve deeper in understanding and discovering the deeply rooted problem in many parts of Borneo, and more importantly, in the state of Sarawak. So today we have Peter Kallang from Setu River, Sarawak. Hi, Peter.
Hi, Norman. How are you doing?
Oh, so far so good. I think things are looking pretty hectic, very tiring here in KL, especially with the COVID-19 pandemic. But I think one of the key things I remember when I was approached by Fiona on this, and I think a lot of people still remember what you all started with the movement called Safe Rivers. Maybe you can share a little bit about how it all started for you.
Well, Setu Rivers was formed back in 2011. The main reason why it was formed was because the government was proposing to build 12 dams, that is on top of the 2 former dams which were built earlier on. The first dam built in Sarawak was Batang, which was back in 1986. And then that followed with the Bakun Dam, which was completed in 2011. So the government, like the rest of Malaysia, looking at how to boost up economic activities so that Malaysia can jump or leapfrog to become industrialized country by the year supposedly 2020. Yeah. So they were creating what they call the economic corridors. Yeah, they have corridors for the northern part of Malaysia, they have corridors for all the rest of it, and then of course Sabah and Sarawak. For Sarawak, the corridor was called the Corridor of Sustainable Renewable, SCORE, Sarawak Corridor of Renewable Energy. Sarawak Corridor of Renewable Energy, so the key or the anchor industries they are looking at was to generate electricity. Yeah. Then this electricity would be used for big, all these factories, and especially those factories which are energy intensive, like smelting plants and all that. Yeah. So beside that, they were also talking about exporting this energy to the neighboring states like in Sabah or even in Brunei, Singapore, and Malaysia. So, but if you look at what they have done in the Bakun Dam and also in the Batang Dam, Bakun Dam covered an area as big as the island of Singapore. All this area comprising villages and agricultural land, and then of course forests, rivers, streams, all inundated by the dam. And the people were forcibly being resettled in a area. In other words, all this flora and fauna, on all this biodiversity and all that is affected by such massive dams. If the Bakun Dam is actually the second largest dams of its kind in the world, that is the concrete face rock field, similar to the one in China, the Three Gorges Dam. We have seen the misery that brought to the indigenous people there. So that's why Setu Rivers was formed in order to coordinate the effort by the various communities in Sarawak to oppose such massive dams. of course, there were a lot of opposition before that. Even for Bakun, there were a lot of opposition. They brought them to the High Court and all that, but they failed to stop the dam. So what we thought was, if we bring all the CSO, the civil society organization, NGO, and the NGO and people in the villages affected together, and we can do the proper plan our strategies and all that. So it would be, we hope that it will be successful. So we brought in a lot of NGO. There were 8 NGOs who came together and we formed Sacrifice. So that's how it came about.
Yeah, just very interestingly, how it all started back in the early 2011. I think the move was even earlier than that. How these big projects displace people and also destroying the nature. What's interesting is that that really boggles my mind. I mean, even I as a Sarawakian, is that why do we need 12 dams and yet we only have a population of just 3 million? The authorities and the government claim that these dams will be able to provide sustainable and renewable energy to people who are far-flung, out of reach, within the electric grid. But at the end of the day, does it really serve its purpose with all these 12 dams, in your opinion?
That is the reason why back in 2016, the chief minister at that time, Adnan Satem, after looking at all the different feedback from people, including NGOs, he found out that there is no strong justification for building so many dams, because back in 2010, that time when they proposed to build a Baram Dam after the completion of the Bakun Dam, our power demand was about 9,900. Yeah, but less than 1 gigawatt is very, there's a lot of excess, about 25% margin there for any, or for intrinsic requirement. Because the power demand is not constant. There are times when you have a lot of people. But with that, we brought in a professor from the University of California and Berkeley, Dan Kamen. He did a 2-year study of the installed power in Sarawak, and then do a projection of the organic growth, if there is a growth. And then not only the organic growth, but also he included the possible projected industrial demand, because the government was talking about the smelting plant and all that. So even with this growth, the organic growth plus the industrial demand, there is no justification for building so many dams. So, of course, even now we have a big margin of excess power generated. That's why after we protest and a lot of studies, we submitted our studies at that time, and then he was willing to listen to us and therefore canceled the Baram Dam.
It was one of the major, I think, the milestone in how CSOs like Safe Rivers and as well the whole community coming together in voicing the concerns and how things are moving. One of the major things over the past 5 years and we can also look ahead in the coming decade, it's the immediate concern and immediate threat right now. It's the growing timber industry, as well as a commodity like palm oil, where it encroaches into native land and displaces a lot of community. Not just displacing people, that we will be seeing a lot of destruction in terms of our virgin forests and all sorts. Displacement of people has been one of the major issues that we see here in Sarawak. We have seen that happening in Sabah as well. So, how do you look at our timber industry in Sarawak so far? Well, the state government boasts that they have one of the best policy when it comes to sustainable industry. They call it sustainable logging. In your opinion, is this just
In fact, that is the very thing that we are trying to point out at the moment, because as you have mentioned, our in Sarawak, you know that back in the 1990s, at the peak of these logging industries in Sarawak, Sarawak export more timber than the Congo and Amazon, more tropical timber than So, but if you look at the land size, Sarawak is 0.05% of the size of the whole of the Amazon and the Congo, and yet they export more than the two regions put together. So that shows how massive, how large, and how they were really going out for logging, and that now leaves a very small area which is still virgin forest. But of course, the government always said that they don't really use it, but they about forest cover. But when you talk about forest cover, we are not talking about the same thing. If you're talking about virgin forest, you're talking about the ecosystem. You're talking about Sarawak or Borneo as a whole is one of the hotspots of ecosystem in the whole world. In fact, there was a study made in 1 hectare area in Borneo. The biodiversity there is equivalent to the whole of the United Kingdom's or even Europe put together. So that is how biodiverse we are the hotspot in the world, but you can see this destruction. And then now that the logging has been going intensive rate, what they are trying to do is to justify that this logging that they're doing now is sustainable. Yeah, sustainable. So what they do, they form an organization in Malaysia that's called Malaysian Timber Certification Council, MTCC for short. So MTCC have drafted the procedures of how to do logging and how to make sure it's sustainable, etc. And then MTCC is registered under this international body called Program for Enforcement of Forest Certification, PEFC. In other words, if MTCC gives certification to this logging company to do logging, so the timber that it exports is being labeled as sustainable, because MTCC is recognized by PEFC, and PEFC is an international body. So therefore, countries like Europe and the US, they buy it. In their mind, it's sustainable. But if you look on the ground, go to the village, go to the interior, what they are doing. I just take one very simple example. There are so many. Now, one is the requirement is that if the people who are living in that area, the owners of the land, so-called the native customary right land, if they do not allow this logging to go on, sustainable or otherwise, whoever the what you call the company must not log it. In other words, they must consider these people who are living on the land as stakeholders who have the same right like any other company or government. But the consultation process should be what we call as classified in the United Nations Declaration on the Right of the Indigenous People, UNRIP. There are 8 requirements in UNRIP as far as the indigenous people are concerned. One of it is the free, prior, informed consent. F means free, prior, and informed consent. So in other words, they have to get the consent, not just to inform the people, get the consent of the people. There must be a consensus. So what they have done here, they have gathered selected people, especially the village headman and the community head. They bring them to a location. In this case, they brought them to their own timber center. They have the timber camp there. They have nice office there. They brought them there, and then they informed the village headman and a few other village representatives that such project was going on. This project would be called FMU or MTC, and We call the timber FMU stand for Forest Management Unit. Forest Management Unit is proposed. And then they ask them to cooperate with them in carrying out this. So in other words, the people in the village affected are not really consulted in a proper way. Only the headmen are being consulted. The headman has no right, actually, if you look at the human rights issue, has no right to speak for the people because everybody has a right for his own house, his own garden, his own land. So what right has the village headman? He has a right on his own property, but not representing everybody else. So that is one of the things that is really disputed at the moment. So this affect an area of in Ulu Baram. They call it Gerenai. So the village people, they are not all happy with it. There are 20, between 20 to 22 villages affected.
So just now you mentioned the Gerenai Concession is about nearly about more than 10,000 people living in this about 22 villages. Most of them are Kenya and there's one Penan village. So when did all this started? You know, when MTTC started with the certification program. When was this brought up? How many years ago? It was just recently. Because when I just heard about it, and that really caught my attention, the current situation. When did they had the meeting with the village headman, and have they started logging at the moment?
In fact, logging is already ongoing, and because this area not only is not a new area, that there are adjacent area which the logging company has and all that. And then they are going ahead with the area which are not being licensed for the logging yet, but it's also under the Gerenai area. We found out the proposal by the company was made in 2018, but the company has gone out to the village and to put poles, pegs, they call it, to identify the area which are being proposed as new.
And these lands are owned by the villagers, right?
Of course, yes. In other words, the village are inside the area. Just imagine one day, one morning you wake up and you found out that you're inside logging somebody's land given up by the government.
And you know it is quite mind-boggling in that, you know, if people living in these areas in unison, in harmony with the nature itself, and then now being threatened in the midst of all this logging, do they offer any compensation or whatnot in this kind of situation, or do you see that there were a lot of in terms of loopholes and how things are being done here?
Yeah, I have no doubt that there are certain compensation of sort. You look at that, there's patterns. You compare to the amount that these people lose, because these people rely a lot on the forest. The Penan used to say that the forest is our bank. You know, we don't go to the ATM to get money, but we go to the forest to make sure that we have sustain our livelihood. Yeah, that's what they say. But if you look at it, for the indigenous people, not only in Sarawak, but in anywhere in the world, the forest, they don't just own it. They are part of the forest. A lot of their custom that they follow, the culture or the traditional thing that they have is related to the forest. You know, let's take, for example, my own group. I'm a Kenya. Yeah, I'm a indigenous person. Kenya. I used to live in the village until I start working in the town and went to school and all that. But I don't know how they do farming and all that. They even mark the area. If you ask the whole Kenya before they knew about the calendar, you ask them, how old are you? And then they will start counting because they did shifting cultivation, you know. Oh, this year we did farm in this what do you call it, in this site. Let's say that I do farm in Long Basut. That year I did farming because they only do farming. I mean, planting paddy once a year. So this year they count it. That's how they. So okay, you are how many years old? That's how they count. And beside that, of course, a lot of the things. Let's take for example the ritual for marriage, for example, for the wedding. They will depict the way that they farm and all that sort of thing. And even a lot of these things are related to them. So now that they're Christian, although a lot of our Kenyan people are Christian, this farming and the land still reflect in the way they look at things. They even look at the moon. What type of moon is ideal for planting? And they're really right. A lot of times I'm surprised, at this particular type of shape, the moon, you must not plant because it will not bear fruit and all that. So the indigenous people, they are not owning the land only, but they're actually part of the land, I would say.
They live part and parcel of the land itself, not just the land. It's how they just do not own the land because the people feel that they have a responsibility, not just in owning the land, in protecting the land and making sure that the land continue to thrive in its own natural existence itself. So, in April, MTCC approved the 148,000 hectares. I can't remember how big is it. Looking at the logging company for Samling to conduct the sustainable forest management in the Baram region. So we've known that there are so many of these timber companies going on in Sarawak. So on and on, year in, year out, the same thing are happening. And this is our situation. How do you see in terms of the communication between the community and the government together, the corporate? We're looking at these three entities itself in their relationship. So how things have gone awry in this situation where people are not being consulted, and then at the end of the day, they will be losing their homes. So what do you say about that?
The thing is, it goes back to this famous case of NCR, the Native Customary Right Land. First of all, the government has its own interpretation of what native customary right land is. And the indigenous people here in Sarawak, that is the Dayak, and in Sabah, the same thing, Dorang Asli in Semenanjung, we all having the same problem. The government interpret the NCR in Sarawak, for example, any land that was cultivated before the 1st of January 1958. But the people have been living on that land long before that. And then you understand that these people they are shifting cultivators and they are doing foraging. They're don't necessarily cut big trees and all that, but they do foraging, collecting all the non-timber product like rotans and all the other things, that herbs and all that. So the indigenous people consider this as their land, but the government may not recognize it. So when the government come in and giving out this timber license to all these developers or timber company or ladang oil palm company and all that, they don't do properly. They don't go and find out from the indigenous people whether there is any claim on that land. See, so they take for granted that their map in their office up in Kuching is shows the where the native land are and where the indigenous people land are. So they just give the license based on their map. No proper consultation. They don't do proactive action to make sure that there is no double claim and all that. So it starts from there. And of course, now we have a lot. I'm sure you know what is going on about the NCR. There was an attempt, even not an attempt, actual amendment to the NCR, then court and all that, but a lot of unhappiness is still going on. So no proper consultation. The people, indigenous people, are not really treated as stakeholders in this whole process. That is a problem.
So it looks like as if, despite trying to speak to the government still thinks that they are, in a facade of trying to come out with policies where they think it is better for people. But however, the community feels very differently about it. So with the Save Rivers together with Bruno Mensa Fund starting this new campaign called Stop the Chop, can you share with us briefly about how are you going to go about with this campaign?
we have written to, like what you said, we have written to the SIRIM, who are the auditors for the MTCC for giving out the certification. So certification was given out in April this year, although complaints were made even as late as September last year. Those things were ignored. So we brought it up, and then first of all, we went to the company, and not we, the village people actually went to the company and asked. The company said that this is not under our jurisdiction. We should go to the forestry department, but we were gave not the letter was also copied to them. So now we have been having meeting with PFC, that is the international body that's based in Geneva. So we are lucky that Bruna Mensa is part of it because they are based in Switzerland. So we are looking at what PFC is doing, because if uh, they don't have communication with MTCC, because MTCC doesn't seem to be in the picture at all when this thing was issued, and then they said that we have to go to the logging company. Logging company said that it's not under the preview. What we are doing is we are getting more feedback from the people in the village, and we are trying to look at what the next step.
Looking from this, right, with European Union office here in KL, and currently we have the parliamentary session. Will Safe Rivers and the other NGOs as well as the partners in looking into bringing this matter up all the way to the European Union to highlight this issue to the EU, because most of these products will be exported to the Europe market, where like for example, like what you have mentioned, the MTCC, they need this. Some of these companies, they need this certification so that it will be seen as sustainable. But what you mentioned earlier, it is not exactly sustainable where communities are not consulted. So what's the next step in how you're going to bring this and highlight this issue up to EU as well as our parliament right now?
We have been in constant contact with the embassies in various countries, not only the European Union, but as well Australia and all the rest of them. And then, communication is ongoing. And of course, the parliamentarian, the only hope that we have would be because the ruling government, we try to communicate with them. We have brought up, they are well aware of what is going on. And the people from the village have communicated with them as well. So this communication is still ongoing. We have a lot of government department that is looking after this.
Peter, maybe you can repeat some of the last sentence that you mentioned earlier, because I lost you in the microphone was going on and off.
Yeah, we have been in communication with different embassies from the foreign embassies in Kuala Lumpur, including the EU embassy, EU representative, different countries, or of course the other countries like India. We are looking at that as well. Yeah, and of course the government departments. Yeah, like in the forestry department, we have been working to them. We have a number of meetings with forestry department, because this area, Gerenai, is within an area which we have proposed to become the Baram Peace Park.
How was the response about when the proposal come out with, making sure that this place is left untouched, and the Peace Park? How was the response from the other side?
The Peace Park was mooted by our community back in the 1990s. Yeah, so after that, they went to see our former chief minister again, Adnan, when he was in London, because it's not possible to see him in Kuching. The proposed thing did not even reach Adnan himself. When it reached the people who are around him, it stopped there. So the Penan community went to London to meet him when he was Sarawakian who were living in the United Kingdom. Adnan said, "Oh, why don't you include the other communities as well? Make it larger." So what used to be called the Penan Peace Park was extended to become the Baram Peace Park. So within the Baram Peace Park, we have Klabit, we have Saban, and Penan, of course. That also good, very good, because we have been having meetings with forestry department, and then it's still ongoing. We're looking at alternative livelihood for the people, looking at infrastructure. We have done some small projects there like micro hydro, and we are doing some baseline study to look at what is really best and what we should do in order to support people. That is, we are working together the forest department.
So looking ahead, Peter, what are your short term future hopes in this kind of campaign? How do you move forward from here? What are your hopes and also what are your hopes in achieving from here, as well as in the short term, what would you like the people?
I would like to see that all industrial logging to stop, and then we will look at all the degraded forest there to get the community to participate with us to do replanting. And then, of course, one of the top priority that we have is looking at small and medium-sized industries that the people can manage, and sustainable agriculture, things like this ecotourism, for example, and then we also have uh, uh, agroforestry, for example, things like that. We are already doing a lot of study and ongoing meetings with other people who have already done this in the different places. Even our neighbor Sabah, they do a lot of these things. So we have visited them. We were also in Kalimantan, Indonesia, in a place called Sukadana, where the NGO have managed to preserve the forest and provide alternative livelihood. So these are the things that small things that we can do. But of course, the long-term thing is the government should think about good infrastructure, uh, roads, and then communication, education, health service, and all the rest of it. Those things we can't. We need the government to come in. The long term that we want.
So, on a final note, right, what is your message to a lot of Malaysians out there? Because, for example, in this side of the world, West Malaysia, we're seeing the Orang Aslis being affected by the degazettement of forests. At the same thing, we are also seeing the same problem in Sabah and Sarawak. So, what is your message to a lot of Malaysians out there?
I think first of all, I find that after I've been involved with the CSO for a number of years, and also before that I was involved with other organizations that defend the rights of the people and looking at that after the welfare. We must be able to identify which is right, which is wrong. We have to look at, are we here just to make sure that certain people get rich, and then and in the process of doing that, they destroy the environment, and then they, of course, neglect the rest of the populations, and ignore the human rights issues and all that. So we have to stand by human rights and, of course, the protection of environment. So when we do that, there are a lot of challenges. Don't expect it to be smooth sailing. This is not a walk in the park. We have to be able to be criticized. We have to be able to become deaf and dumb, I would say. Become deaf to the people who criticize. Keep on talking to people and find out who are telling the truth and who are lies to us. In the they sometimes say that the good thing is bad. They're trying to dress it up in such a way. What is the long-term target? Are we only thinking about ourselves, or are we thinking about our children and grandchildren and future of Sarawak and the rest of the world? So we have to see our focus. And when we do that, we have, don't worry about people criticizing us, suing us. Like in the case of the Baram Dam, they sue us for 3.5 million. So luckily, when Adnan canceled the dam, and then they decided settlement outside court. So sometimes we need to really put our neck on the chopping block to say.
I really admire some of like from your work and so many others out there, putting a neck on a chopping block. At the end of the day, it's all about it because it affects every one of us. So for those of you who are listening, you can support this campaign by going to saverivers.org/stop the chop, STOPTHECHOP, saverivers.org, stop the chop. So thank you so much, Peter, for joining me today, and I hope to see you once the COVID-19 pandemic is over. I hope to see you soon in Miri. Then we will venture deeper into Gerenai area to document, see what's going on right there, what are the timber concessionaires as well as the government authorities are doing right there. So thank you so much, Peter, for joining me. And you're listening to Bicara Minggu Ini, uncovering current affairs and politics, and you can listen to the stories and interviews on Spotify, Anchor, Google Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts on iTunes. For more updates and stories, if you have any suggestions, you can tweet to me at I'mNomGo. Thank you for listening, and if you want to support, do contact Peter Kallang. If you want to see what's going on down the ground, Peter Kallang and Save Rivers will show you, how have these events have affected so many people on the ground. Thank you so much, Peter.